And your name?
Eshaan, Eshaan, last initial V.
Okay. And go ahead.
Andy.
Andy.
Peter.
Peter.
Shara. You got it?
Yeah.
You got it. That's the genius.
I got it, man. Joseph? Okay. Definitely got that
I'm gonna
one.
leave the
What kind of water is this?
So we want to say
Water.
Are you guys ready to go?
yes.
Kentucky water.
Here's toss-up 1. Good luck, guys. For most of the 1960s, the definitive textbook on this behavior was the work of Irving Bieber. This behavior was criticized in a 1956 book by Edmund Bergler, who called its practitioners injustice collectors. Evelyn Hooker's groundbreaking 1957 paper noted that there was no mental difference between people who did or did not engage in this behavior. People who exclusively demonstrated this behavior were ranked 6 on a scale named for a zoologist at Indiana University. The first objective textbook on it was an 1897 work by Havelock Ellis. Until 1974, people exhibiting this behavior were classified by the American...
Being gay.
Yes.
Oh,
Bonus. The Biot-Savart law can be used to calculate the magnitude of this quantity produced by a current. For example, to identify this quantity, the integral of this quantity over a closed loop equals mu naught times the enclosed current according to Ampere's law.
Magnetic field.
For a vector such as the magnetic field, the field can be decomposed into a sum where one of the terms is the curl of this quantity. The gauge fixing condition for the Coulomb gauge requires that the divergence of this quantity be 0. Answer.
Flux.
Vector potential. The B field is equal to mu naught times the quantity h plus this value. It equals the magnetic dipole moment per unit volume, and its curl gives the current density.
Flux.
No, magnetization. 10 points on that bonus. Toss up 2. Adherents of this faith were heavily divided after the 1980 Glacier View event, a 5-day conference in Colorado. That meeting led to the Australian Desmond Ford having his credentials revoked and leaving this faith. It helped introduce the modern concept of breakfast cereal, as the founder of Kellogg's cereal was a devoted member, and this faith's...
Quaker?
Nope. Faith's emphasis on healthy eating is one of the reasons why Loma Linda, California has a high longevity rate. Its doctrine of investigative judgment holds that God has been performing the divine judgment of Christians since 1844. Emerging out of the Millerite movement, this faith holds the writings of Ellen White to a special authority, exceeded only by the Bible. For 10 points, name this religious group that believes Saturday is the Sabbath.
Seventh day.
Prompt?
Advent.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, nice. So you didn't know the answer. You're just like showing off.
Bonus, a paperboy in this village named Joe Crowell graduates at the top of his class at college, but dies in World War I. For 10 points each, name this village the setting of a play in which the stage manager narrates the lives of such people as Emily Webb and George Gibbs.
Okay. Grover's Corners.
Grover's Corners is the setting of this Thornton Wilder play that typically uses no stage directions or scenery during productions.
Our Town.
During the third act of Our Town, dialogue reveals that many characters have died in between the acts. This alcoholic has died after hanging himself in the attic. His epitaph is not words, but rather symbols.
Is Simon? Simon.
Yes, all 30.
You read it?
Toss up 3. Chris Freiling argued that this statement is false because it is equivalent to the negation of his axiom of symmetry. It's not the axiom of choice, but Gödel's constructible universe was introduced to demonstrate the consistency of this statement, which was shown to be independent of Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory by Paul Cohen using the technique of forcing, for which he won a 1966 Fields Medal. This statement can be reformulated as saying that the first Beth number is equal to the first Aleph number, or alternatively, that
Diagonalization proof.
Nope. That the number of reals is Aleph 1. For 10 points, identify this assertion in set theory that states that there are no sets whose cardinality is strictly between that of the integers and that of the real numbers.
No.
The continuum hypothesis.
Oh, that's it. Right.
Toss up 4. This man was appointed governor of Higüey after leading a successful campaign against the natives of the region. Woodrow Wilson had a hypothesis about this man and a variety of brown tea. He may have been a deckhand on the second of Columbus's voyages and supposedly discovered the Gulf Stream. This man launched one expedition in search of the island of Bimini. Rumors of gold led him to establish the colony of Capara, the first European settlement in Puerto Rico. One territory...
That's Leo.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Jeff has been friendly.
Name these things about economist Daron Acemoglu. For 10 points each, Acemoglu's book, Why Nations Fail, compares inclusive institutions with oppressive institutions described by this term, such as North Korea.
Oh, yeah.
Answer. Extractive. Acemoglu is currently employed by this university. Robert Solow and Paul Samuelson were two longtime faculty members at this university.
Chicago.
MIT. Acemoglu's breakout paper claimed that countries that engaged in this practice only developed locations where diseases were relatively rare. Thus European countries engaged in this practice made few infrastructural developments in Central Africa.
Isolationism.
Colonialism.
Sorry.
Nothing on the bonus.
It's okay.
Toss-up 5. A painting of silhouettes of this color, People Begin to Fly, echoes a photograph of the artist leaping from a building's second story. The monotone symphony was played at a living brush exhibit where nude women smeared themselves with paint of this color to create anthropometry paintings. That international shade of this color was used in the work of...
Orange.
Nope. Yves Klein. A painting subtitled Souvenir of Biskra depicts a nude of this color and was created by Henri Matisse. Many horses of this color were painted by Franz Marc, who, with the painter of many improvisations and compositions, founded a movement named for a figure of this color. For 10 points, Vasily Kandinsky founded a movement named for a rider of what primary color?
Blue.
Yeah.
Columbia Bridge.
And here's your bonus. This character escapes after being shot in the leg and taken for dead. For 10 points each. Name this character who desperately tries to warn the people of Siget, shouting he does not want money or pity, but only to be listened to. He believes God saved him, so he could warn the villagers.
Moshe the Beetle.
Yes. Moshe the Beetle appears in this acclaimed 1960 Holocaust memoir by Elie Wiesel.
Night.
This Italian Jewish author of the periodic table described his experience in the Auschwitz concentration camp in his Holocaust memoir, If This Is a Man.
No.
Primo Levi. 20. Toss-up 6. During a campaign, this candidate launched an attack ad against his opponent's use of handlers that asked, "They'd like to sell you a package, wouldn't you rather choose a president?" Rumors about his supposed psychiatric treatments were spread by strategist Lee Atwater. Referred to as a card-carrying member of the ACLU.
Dukakis.
Yeah.
I fail to understand how
Presence of this element may enhance binding of EIFF4 to mRNA IRE sequences. For 10 points each. Name this metal whose namesake response proteins bind to IRE sites in the transcripts of proteins involved in its metabolism, such as ferritin and the transferrin receptor.
iron.
Yes, an IRES sequence permits translation independent of this post-transcriptional structure added to the end of mRNA. The initiation factor of EIF43 binds to this 7-methylguanylate structure.
The poly-A tails.
5' cap. IRE1 initiates this signaling pathway by unconventionally splicing XBP1 mRNA to yield a transcription factor that upregulates ERAD genes.
No.
Okay. Unfolded protein response. 10 on that bonus. Toss-up 7. Percy Shelley wrote a discourse on the manners of the ancient Greeks to accompany his translation of this work. This work describes Peneus' seduction of the drunken Poros, resulting in the conception of a god who serves as a spiritual intermediate between the divine and the mortal. A man in this work recalls an upward mental progression beginning with the conception of a single beautiful object and culminating in the conception of absolute beauty, which was described to him by Diotima of Mantinea. In this work, a parable in which 3 sexes of 8-limbed humans are split into 2 by Zeus.
Symposium.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Non-architectural feats by this man include his authorship of the satirical Latin verse comedy Philodoxius and his invention of the first polyalphabetic cipher. For 10 points each. Name this Italian architect who wrote the first theoretical text on perspective, De Pictura, and updated a Vitruvius text in his 10 books on architecture.
10 books on Palladio?
Palladium.
Leon Battista Alberti. Alberti's original design for the Basilica of Sant'Andrea in this city lacks a transept, dome, and choir. Giulio Romano both designed the Palazzo del Te and painted the frescoes contained therein in this northern Italian city.
Come on. I'm saying Padua. But.
Answer.
Padua.
Mantua. Although Alberti proclaimed these building elements to be the most noble, they are completely absent from his design for the facade of San Sebastiano, also in Mantua. Alberti often used the colossal and Corinthian orders of these support structures in the facade of Sant'Andrea.
Columns.
10.
Two bonuses or one bonus?
Just one. So 10 on the bonus.
Wait, which one did they get? Did they get?
Columns.
They got
Oh
columns.
yeah, columns. Okay, yeah.
Alright, toss up 8. The glaucoma drug timolol is also used to prevent heart attacks and these events. The MBA type of them was formerly attributed to the spasms of the basilar artery. People with CACNA1A mutations have weaknesses in half the body during these events. One model of these events posits successive waves of depolarization, ischemia, and vasoconstriction, and is called cortical spreading depression. These events are often treated using agonists of the 5-HT1B and 5-HT1D receptors called triptans. Their acephalgic type only involves the scintillating scotoma or other auras that classically precede these events, and people suffering from these events are often sensitive to both light and sound.
Migraine.
Yeah.
I have some inside knowledge.
And your bonus. Let's hope you have inside knowledge of... In one myth, this deity created the world by breathing life into stones, but he fell short of his own standards, so he destroyed his creations and had to repeat the process. For example, teach name this god who supposedly disappeared from the world by walking on water westward into the Pacific Ocean.
I do not have inside knowledge of this. This is Maui.
Viracocha. Viracocha was one of the chief gods revered by this South American civilization who created representations of Viracocha at Ollantaytambo and Cusco.
The Incans.
In a different story, Viracocha was the progenitor of the first Incan Manco Capac, whose most prized possession was a golden object of this type. A god named after this type of object is shown in the Gateway of the Sun in Tiwanaku and was worshipped by medieval residents of the Cook Islands.
A staff.
That's for 20.
Nice.
Toss up 9. A character who lives in this province envisions traveling with Banga on journeys to the sun and moon. Amra, a servant girl who lives in this province, fends off people who want to foreclose on her master's estate by pretending to be a ghost. In this province, a man orders Afranius to commit murder by asking him to provide protection to the victim. Miriam and Tirza, the mother and sister of a resident of this province, are cured of leprosy during a thunderstorm. In this province, a man avenges himself on Messala by winning...
Judea.
Yes.
Are these all Ben Hercules?
Yep. And your bonus. Name these composers who wrote pieces titled Symphony in C. This composer was a student of Charles Gounod when he wrote his Symphony in C, which he suppressed due to similarities with his teacher's Symphony in D. He wrote the opera Carmen.
Bizet.
This highly self-critical composer published his Symphony in C, but destroyed all sketches of a planned second symphony. He wrote the ballet La Péri and the opera Ariadne and Bluebeard.
Bela Bartok.
Paul Dukas. This composer of a neoclassical symphony in C also wrote the single-movement symphonies of wind instruments as a memorial to Claude Debussy and omitted violins from his Symphony of Psalms.
This is Stravinsky.
Yes, 20. Toss up 10. In this symphony, a sustained E major harmonium chord plays over a solo violin melody that Henry Louis de Lagrange dubbed this symphony's love theme. A children's chorus follows a surge in E major by the trombones and trumpets that introduces the Accende Lumens Sensibus theme of this symphony. A loud E-flat major organ chord introduces the first part of this symphony, which is a setting of the Veni Creator Spiritus hymn.
Reformation.
Nope. Its second part is based on Goethe's Faust. The composer's friend Emil Gutmann coined the nickname of this symphony after witnessing 858 singers and 171 musicians play the piece at its premiere in Munich. For 10 points, name this symphony by Gustav Mahler written for the title number of performers.
Symphony of 1,000.
Yeah.
They're actually slightly more than 1,000. Thank you very much.
Bonus. The longest serving member of this group was Vijoyo Nisisastro. who held office until 2001. For 10 points each. Name this group of American-educated economists in Indonesia. During the Suharto regime, they promoted the liberalization and deregulation of the country's economy.
The Chicago Bull?
Berkeley Mafia.
Oh.
The Berkeley Mafia is frequently compared to a similar group of economic advisors whose policies were adopted by Augusto Pinochet. That group was known as the Boys from this place where they had studied.
Would you look at that? Chicago.
Yep. Pinochet took power after a 1973 coup in this South American country.
Chile.
Yeah, 20. I have a score of 75 for Alabama B and 140 for Nevada.
I thought I was behind.
I actually have 145. And
Okay.
I'm assuming,
That's what he said.
no, you said 140, right?
I said 140, yes.
Okay, I have 145.
I don't have them having any negs.
I have 135 to 80.
Those Quakers.
Quakers.
Yeah,
Oh,
Quakers.
yeah,
Ah,
I
that's
negged
right.
on. I negged on. I said Quakers.
That's right. So Quakers on, that was number
So that was number 2.
2, yes.
And then on question 1, Alabama B had 1 bonus.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's, okay, so 75 to 145 or?
But I have 135, so I'm going to go down running total for Nevada. Minus 5, 25, 45, no?
Yeah. I made a
45?
mistake. You're right, you're right.
Okay. So 135 is right, and then on Alabama B, I have 75. Is that right?
How'd you get 75?
I have 20, 60, 55, 65, 60, 80,
Oh,
75.
got it.
Good?
Yep.
Okay. So again, the score is 75, 135. Here's toss-up 11. One of these figures was said to erect pillars with vaginas on them in places that surrendered to him too easily. A lion-headed deity called Shemzu butchers other gods for these figures to eat in a cannibal hymn first addressed to one called Unas. These people had a wolf's tail pinned to them in a ceremony that may have replaced their outright ceremonial murder by priests, the Sed festival. Protection...
Bulls.
Nope. Protection of these people was symbolized by a vulture and a Uraeus serpent, representing the two ladies Nekbet and Wajet, who also names an eye that symbolizes both these people and their patron Horus. For 10 points, name these people, analogized to Horus in life and Osiris in death by the pyramid text found in their tombs.
Dead. Egyptian dead.
No, I have pharaohs.
Oh, God. Oh, yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
I'm sorry. Oh, shoot.
Okay, toss-up 12. After massacring unarmed prisoners of war in this country, Horace West and John Compton were put on trial. For perceived passivity in this country, John Lucas was replaced by Lucian Truscott, much to the approval of Winston Churchill. A general was second-guessed for his slowness in breaking through the Gustav Line in this country, and for later choosing to take the capital instead of trapping Albert Kesselring's 10th Army. Mark Clark was criticized for his decision to bomb a historic abbey in this country.
Germany?
Nope. American forces participated in Operation Husky, a 1943 attack on an island belonging to this country. For 10 points, the battles of Anzio and Monte Cassino occurred in what European country during World War II and helped pave the way for Allied occupation of Rome?
Italy.
Yeah. Bonus. The first one of these things was built on Charter Hill at UC Berkeley. For 10 points each, identify these mountainside geoglyphs, common in the American West, where they are frequently erected to represent high schools or colleges. The University of Utah and Brigham Young University are both home to early examples of these.
Oh, examples of what? Clock tower. Oh, that's a good game. What's the other?
Answer.
Caroline?
A hillside letters. The fourth hillside letter built was an M atop Mount Zion, built by and overlooking this state's School of Mines in its city of Golden.
Colorado.
Another hillside letter taking the shape of an M is atop Mount Sentinel overlooking this state's flagship university in Missoula. The state also has hillside M's in Butte and Bozeman to represent some of its other public universities.
Montana.
20.
Yeah, that's right. Everything's there.
13. The Book-Wen model can be used to describe nonlinear systems that exhibit this phenomenon, and the power lost by this phenomenon can be determined using Steinmetz's equation. The IV curve of a memristor displays the pinched form of this phenomenon. Rolling resistance in tires occurs mostly due to the fact that rubber exhibits this phenomenon. Degaussing is unable to completely remove remnants due to this behavior. In systems that display this phenomenon, motions in domain walls lead to jumps in magnetization in the Barkhausen effect. For 10 points, name this phenomenon commonly observed in ferromagnets in which the state of a system is dependent on its history. Answer.
Scintillation.
No.
Yeah.
Hysteresis. Toss-up 14. In 2016, Martin Shane was indicted for making up a company that supposedly made these items for the Oregon University system. The majority of funds provided by Andrew Cuomo's Buffalo Billion program go to a factory for these items. As a result of the Majuro Declaration, the use of these items in Pacific countries like Tuvalu increased, and in 2012 the territory of Tokelau set a milestone in the use of these items. Despite receiving over $500 million in government loans, a company that made these items from cylindrical components went bankrupt in 2011. Years after they were dismantled by Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama reinstalled these items on the White House roof.
Solar panel.
Yeah.
I see.
Bonus. Signs of this painting's incompleteness include a lone foot next to an extremely small St. Jerome and only one column arising from several bases, for 10 points each. Name this painting whose title woman towers over 5 angels bearing gifts and holds an enormous baby Jesus on her lap.
Madonna of the long neck. Yes. Madonna of the long neck.
Parmigiano's Madonna with the Long Neck and Bronzino's Venus, Cupid, Folly, and Time are key examples of this artistic style that emerged between the Renaissance and Baroque, which employs serpentine poses and elongated body parts. Francis I invited painters like Primaticcio and Rosso Fiorentino to decorate this building, which eventually lent its name to a separate school of mannerism. This building was the original home of a Benvenuto Cellini sculpture of a nymph and a stag's head. Answer. Chateau de Fontainebleau.
I knew it was Fontainebleau. That was like 7.
20. Toss-up 15. In an opera set in this country, an offstage viola d'amore and a wordless chorus of sopranos and tenors play a plaintive melody as a woman keeps an all-night vigil. In a different opera, a royal procession in this country introduces the title character's daughter-in-law-elect, Katisha. The resident of this country threatens that he has got a little list of people he'd like to kill in his role as Lord High Executioner. The thought of a ship...
Japan?
Yep. Bonus. Answer some questions about the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture for 10 points each. The conjecture involves the rational points on these mathematical objects, which are used in cryptography. If correspondence between these objects and modular forms was the basis of the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture, a key ingredient in the proof of Fermat's last theorem.
How do I get these bonuses? Graphs.
Elliptic curves. The conjecture gives a specific value for the first coefficient of this series for an elliptic curve. This kind of power series, which includes Maclaurin series, is a local approximation of an analytic function with coefficients equal to the kth derivative of the function at some point divided by k factorial.
No.
Taylor series. The conjecture remains unresolved for groups for which this quantity is greater than 1. For a matrix, this quantity is equal to the dimension of the vector space spanned by its columns.
The determinant?
Rank.
Good.
Right now it's tied at 135.
Yep.
Wait, how is it tied at 135? Because I got like...
You negative one.
You got
Oh,
And then
yeah,
twice.
okay, negative ones, okay.
Toss-up 16. While staying in the city, a man hears the story of Quran, a circus manager whose passion was founding a church exclusively for dogs. At the end of a novel set in the city, an old priest tells a girl, "You can't conceive, my child, nor can I or anyone, the appalling strangeness of the mercy of God." This is the first place that Henry Pulling is taken by Augusta in the novel Travels with My Aunt. In this city, Ida Arnold summons the police to the site of a mutual suicide pact where Rose's life is saved, but her husband jumps off a cliff. In a novel titled For a Type of Candy Sold in This City, the journalist Fred Hale is murdered by gang leader Pinky Brown. For 10 points, name this English seaside resort whose rock titles a novel by...
Frightened?
Yes.
You know that was your fault?
I was gonna say Dover at first.
Okay.
How about roll?
Bonus. A recent president of both this movement and Nagri Amel also served as her country's ambassador to Russia for that point each. Name this movement that believes a certain figure will return on February 15th. In regions like Tana, followers of this movement built numerous landing strips and typically advocate rejecting Western culture. Answer. John Frum movement. The name John From may refer to someone named John saying he is from this country. Many servicemen from this country were stationed in the Pacific during World War II to fight Japan.
USA?
Yes, the John From movement, like the Ghost Dance movement and the Heaven's Gate group, is this type of movement that predicts a major event that will totally transform society. Christians who follow such movements emphasize the reign of Jesus after the second coming.
Is it apocalypse cult? Okay. Yeah, apocalypse cult.
Millenarianism, or millennialism. So 10 points there. Alright, toss up 17. The most stable 18-electron complex prepared by reacting neutral iron metal with carbon monoxide has this geometry. Crystal field theory predicts its d orbital splitting to have dxz and yz degenerate and lowest in energy, then dxy and x squared y squared degenerate, followed by dz squared fully anti-bonding. Berry pseudo-rotation interchanges the two non-equivalent ligand environments in this geometry. Those are axial and equatorial. Xenon difluoride has its central electron pairs arranged in this geometry. Compounds with a seesaw or T-shaped molecular geometry also have this electron pair geometry.
Tetrahedral.
What?
Tetrahedral.
No. Compounds with this geometry have a central atom with dsp3 hybridization. For 10 points, name this molecular geometry taken by phosphorus pentafluoride.
Trigonal planar.
Trigonal bipyramidal.
And what toss-up we're going into next?
This is 18. This character's future husband accidentally forgets to take off a paper soldier hat while reading Friedrich Schiller's depiction of the death of Wallenstein to her. This character fails to tell her sister about a section of thin ice on a river in a chapter in which this character meets Apollyon. She first meets one of her friends while hiding behind a curtain to avoid boys at Sally Gardner's New Year's Eve party. After inheriting her aunt's estate, Plumfield, this character converts it into a school with her husband, Professor Bear.
Meg.
Nope. This aspiring writer declines a marriage proposal from her neighbor Lori. For 10 points, name this tomboyish sister of Meg, Beth, and Amy in Louisa May Alcott's Little Women.
Jane?
Joe.
I
Toss up 19. In 2009, a man in his country crashed his car into a parade in an attempt to hit a bus carrying the royal family. A ruler of this country was married to a prince accused of receiving $1 million bribe from Lockheed. That queen here had daughters who controversially married the Carlos Duke of Parma and a former Hitler Youth member who became Prince Klaus. In this country, Mohammed Bouyeri brutally murdered a director who made the film Submission about abused Muslim women. Its ruler abdicated in 2013, ending her 33-year reign. This country...
The Netherlands?
Yes. Now we're tied at 145, and here's your bonus. This event was coordinated with the Earl of Argyll's uprising in Scotland for 10 points each. Name this 1685 revolt. After its failure, any participants were either executed or banished in the trials called the Bloody Assizes.
Duke of Monmouth's Rebellion?
I have just Monmouth Rebellion. The target of the Monmouth Rebellion, James II, was eventually overthrown in the Glorious Revolution and replaced by this husband of Mary. He was the third English ruler with his name.
Third.
Yes, James and his predecessor Charles II were previously targeted in a 1683 plot in which conspirators planned to hide in an ambushing force in this mansion.
Rye House?
Yes. 20.
Can I protest that Monmouth?
Yep, I'll note it down. And you said the Duke of Monmouth Rebellion.
I said the Duke of Monmouth's Rebellion.
Okay. Alright, that's been noted, and here's our final toss-up, with you provisionally up 20. The fourth part of this poem alludes to Dante's Paradiso in its description of the perpetual star multifoliate rose. This poem imagines lips that would kiss, which form prayers to broken stone in its third section, which begins, "This is the dead land." It quotes Joseph Conrad's line, "Life is very long," and fragments of the Lord's Prayer in its final section, which observes, "Between the idea and the reality falls the shadow." Its first stanza describes the title characters as shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. This poem's final lines are, "This is the way the world ends, not..."
Hollow Man.
Yes.
Good.
And bonus, a central household in this novel is managed by a woman whose name means Splendid Phoenix. For 10 points each, name this novel in which the protagonist, born with a piece of jade in his mouth, is forced by his family into an arranged marriage, causing his cousin to waste away and die of grief.
A Suitable Boy.
Dream of the Red Chamber is one of the 4 great classical novels of this language. It was used to write Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Chinese.
Yes. Near the end of the novel, Bao Yu is guided through a dream by this type of person, whom Bao Yu is destined to accompany. Earlier, this type of person had given a prized golden locket to Bao Chai.
Monk.
Yes. 20. Alright, so the protest does matter, and I'm going to file it. Go on to your next game.
Oh, alright. So it's just tied. Which you called back later.
It's not tied, but it provisionally could be tied.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So if it
Could
does
be
stand.
If it does stand, then presumably you'll be called to play a tiebreaker sudden death toss-up.
Sounds good.
But good game, guys.
Again.